The spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General Farhan Haq says that Sri Lanka must ensure all segments of society are included in the decision-making process. Speaking exclusively to News1st, Shami Razuldeen at the UN headquarters in New York, Farhan Haq stressed that this would be one of the key focus areas of the UNHRC team due to visit the island later this month. The UNHRC team would be visiting Sri Lanka as part of the US-sponsored resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Session in Geneva earlier this year.
Now, since the US-sponsored resolution was passed in March in Geneva, Mr. Haq, I want to know, do you see any progress as far as accountability and reconciliation is concerned here in Sri Lanka?
Well, we're certainly hopeful for that. What we're trying to do is see whether the government of Sri Lanka can both deal with the question of accountability sufficiently and make sure that all segments of society are included in the decision-making processes of Sri Lanka. So we've been hopeful for that, and we also believe, of course, that other bodies need to try to see whether there's sufficient accountability in what's happened in Sri Lanka in the past. As you know, the Secretary General had an advisory panel that recommended further activity on behalf of accountability for the people of Sri Lanka. And the Human Rights Council did take up some of this, and we're hopeful that the UN's human rights bodies will continue to look into what can further be done to ensure appropriate accountability in Sri Lanka.
Is the United Nations satisfied the manner in which Sri Lanka has progressed and undertaken its responsibilities on reconciliation and accountability?
Well, any progress in reconciliation is to be welcome, and we certainly hope that they'll continue to do so. But much more needs to be done, particularly in terms of making sure that the Tamil community is included appropriately in Sri Lankan life. And we're hopeful that that will continue. The Secretary General, as you know, did meet several years back with President Rajapaksa, and they agreed on several key steps forward for Sri Lankan society, and that included the idea of inclusiveness as well as of accountability. And we hope that the government will abide by its commitments on those regards.
On September 14th, the UNHRC team will be visiting Sri Lanka. Mr. Haq, I want to know what would be the focus area of this particular group in question?
Well, every year the special rapporteurs of the UN system, who are independent, by the way, of the Secretary General, go to all countries to look at how the country's actual practice matches up with their commitments under the international human rights and humanitarian law treaties. And so that's what will be happening over this trip as well.
What would be the observations of the UNHRC during the UNHRC periodic review to be held later this year on Sri Lanka, Mr. Haq?
Well, the periodic review is something that all countries are supposed to go through, and this is a normal process. Every country gets a chance essentially to be reviewed by its peers, and we hope that through that process each country will make progress in terms of how it deals with human rights commitments.
In terms of Sri Lanka, what would be the reactions, observations of the UNHRC?
Well, those are still forthcoming. We'll leave it to them to evaluate the situation on the ground, see what needs to be done in terms of follow-up, and report back to the Human Council.